to the Gospel of Mark. The Gospel of Mark, chapter 14, verses 32 through 42. It's page 929. Hold up. It's 927 in some pew Bibles and 929 in others, because clearly this pew Bible right here is 929. Nope, it's 927. I'm at the wrong place. Let me flip over. I'm talking trash. 927. 927. When you found it, say amen. If you're still turning, say wait on me. All right, 927. Now, if you're not using the pew Bible, it's right after Matthew, the second book in the New Testament. Right after Matthew. We're going to start at verse 32. All right. Let us hear now the word of God. They went to a place called Gethsemane, and he said to his disciples, "Sit here while I pray." He took with him Peter and James and John and began to be distressed and agitated. And he said to them, "I am deeply grieved, even to death. Remain here and keep awake." And going a little farther, he threw himself on the ground and prayed that, if it were possible, that the hour might pass from him. He said, "Abba, Father, for you all things are possible. Remove this cup from me, yet not what I want, but what you want." He came and found them sleeping, and he said to Peter, "Simon, are you asleep? Could you not keep awake 1 hour? Keep awake and pray that you may not come into the time of trial. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak." And again he went away and prayed, saying the same words. And once more he came and found them sleeping, for their eyes were very heavy, and they did not know what to say to him. He came a third time, and he said to them, "Are you still sleeping and taking your rest? Enough, the hour has come. The Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. Get up, let us go, let us be going. See, my betrayer is at hand." Verse 36, he said, "Abba, Father, for you all things are possible. Remove this cup from me, yet not what I want, but what you want." This morning we'll come from the subject, lessons from Gethsemane. Lessons from the garden, Lessons from the garden. Turn to your neighbor and say, "Lessons from the garden." Turn to your other neighbor and say, "Lessons from the garden." Now turn to somebody you haven't said it to yet and say, "Lessons from the garden." All right. All right, y'all ready? All right, let's go. About 3 or 4 years ago, my father learned how to communicate via text message. I learned how to text message. And this is the funny thing about parents: when they learn new technology, they tend to go overboard with it. Not my father, of course, not my father, Dad, not you, of course, not you. But I know for some folks, y'all had that experience that your parents go a little overboard when they find new technology, when they finally get on Facebook. Yeah, that's right. So they start liking everybody's pictures, start tagging folks by accident. You know, you got to make sure you give your folks a tutorial before they hop on Facebook, okay? But but the thing is, I'm not mad about it. I'm not mad at my dad for it, because the thing is, once he learned how to text message, he began to send the family inspirational text messages every morning. Every morning we'll be faithfully looking for this text message. And beginning last year, my dad decided to add a yearly mantra to his text messages. The mantra for last year is something that we say at the end of service every Sunday. It says, "Keep the faith and keep looking up." So my childhood pastor at 6th Avenue Baptist, Reverend John Porter, he said those words to us every Sunday after service. And for some that may not know, he served as a pulpit assistant here for a time. And so he took those words from Ebenezer and brought them over to Birmingham. So I grew up with Ebenezer a part of me, and I didn't even know it. But him sending those words every morning, because there were some days I wasn't feeling so good and my head was down. But I was able to look at my phone and see my dad's reminder to keep the faith and keep looking up. And so for this year, the mantra is not my will, but your will for my life, Lord. So for 25 days going into 2015, typically between the hours of 6 a.m. and 7 a.m. This morning it came at 6:26 a.m. My dad sends this message out and the words read, not my will, but your will for my life. This text is a constant reminder to me, and I make sure I whisper it to myself every morning to say, you know what, Lord, not my will, but your will be done. These words, they take us into this Gethsemane moment in our text where Jesus has come once again to this place. He's come again to the garden, but this time he's here because it's very serious. It's a very serious situation going on. Jesus enters the garden after having shared his final meal with his disciples. And he comes into the garden and he's very agitated. He's disturbed. He's upset. He's distressed. You see it in the Luke account. They say he prayed so hard that it was like blood dripping down to the ground. You see, Jesus was not feeling so good right here. And so Jesus goes into the garden, then he calls a couple of more of his disciples to go with him. And then he eventually gets to a place where he's by himself, throws himself on the ground, and begins to pray this prayer and says, Abba, Father, for you all things are possible. Remove this cup from me, yet not what I want, but what you want. This is a brave prayer for Jesus to pray. Because while in agony and facing certain death, Jesus is able to press on and say, yet not what I want, but what you want. Or from the words of memory from the King James Version, nevertheless, not my will, but thy will be done. These are noble words for Jesus to pray that I'm going to willingly submit my own personal will to do what God would have me do in this life. Though those were the proper words for Jesus to pray, nevertheless, not thy will, not my will, but thy will be done. These same words we hear sort of in the Lord's Prayer, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. You see, it's a notion that it's God over everything. It's God over my own purposes. It's God over my own desires. It's God's will and God's way. It's like whatever God wants, that's what I want, because God's will, that's all that matters. Nevertheless, not thy will, not my will, but thy will be done. But I began to take a closer look at the text. And I looked at the text and I looked at the beginning clause of the prayer, and Jesus asked, Abba, Father, for you all things are possible. Remove this cup from me. Let me say it in the New Revised Wording Version. What's good, Dad? Can I ask you something real quick? So I know the conversations we had a little while back, but I've really been thinking about this whole cross and crucifixion thing. Been thinking this thing over. You trying to find somebody else to do it? Like really, it's a whole bunch of other cups in the house I wouldn't mind drinking from, but that one right there, can somebody else take that? I took a sip and I didn't quite like it. So can you remove this cup from me? And so when I think about that, in so many words, Jesus wanted out, Reverend Jones. Jesus wanted out. Jesus wasn't excited about going to the cross. I can imagine Jesus seeing his life flash before his eyes, and the opportunities he will miss out on life because of where God was leading him. You see, Jesus looked to his Father and asked, if you could remove this cup from me, because I don't want to drink it. Jesus was so serious about this prayer that he prayed it 3 times. It's one thing to pray something one time, but how many of y'all have gone to God and prayed something over and over and over and over and over again because you were serious about it, right? So Jesus is serious about this prayer about God, remove this cup. Too often we rush to nevertheless, not my will, but thy will be done. We rush there because we know what? That's what we're supposed to say. If I'm a good follower of the Lord, that's what I'm supposed to say, not my will, but your will, because guess, God, whatever you want, that's what matters, not what I want, but what you want, God. But have we ever really taken the time to sit down and consider if Jesus had his own will? If Jesus had his own desires? If Jesus had desires that weren't necessarily God's will for his life? Did Jesus want a wife? Did Jesus want to get married and start a family? Did Jesus want to be a fisherman? Did he want to be a carpenter like his father? Did he want to be something, anything other than the Messiah? What were his wants? What did Jesus want? We rush to nevertheless, but let's sit with the idea that Jesus may have had other desires. Let's sit with this. In the real sense, Jesus did not want to die. We've made the crucifixion and the cross real nice. We be jewel crosses. We wear them around our neck. We make sure that we got us a nice little, 2-carat little stone in there. Because we know we made the cross look pretty. We make it sound like Jesus was excited about dying a criminal's death. Let me tell you where Jesus grew up sawing. Jesus grew up in the era where the Roman Empire would leave the dead and the crucified hung on their crosses for the community to see. So if anyone would dare try to challenge the empire, they would see, hey, that's your fate when you try to go up against Rome. Let me see if I can help you see it. If we look at Jackson Street, and you know we have street signs going up and down Jackson Street. If we look at Jackson Street, and instead of seeing the street signs, we see persons hung up where the street signs are. And you're riding down Jackson Street and you see the bodies hung up, and then you hang your left on the Auburn and you see more bodies hung up. And then you go down Jackson and then you make another left and you're back on Boulevard and you see more bodies hung up. And then you make a right on the Freedom Parkway, you keep riding down Freedom Parkway, then you see some more bodies hung up. And then you go from Freedom Parkway to Ponce de Leon, you're going to hang another right, and you see more bodies hung up. That's what they saw. It wasn't pretty. It was a reminder of that, hey, when you try to fight for the least of these, when you try to fight for justice, when you try to stand up against the status quo and fight for folks that don't have a voice, guess what? When you challenge empire, that's what happens to you. So I honestly don't think that this was something Jesus was excited about. So as I think about Jesus and consider his plea, I want us all to consider for ourselves, when we say the words, nevertheless, not my will, but thy will be done, do we really understand the prayer we are praying? Because let me say it like this. What if God's will for my life and my personal will don't line up? What if God has one agenda and I have another agenda? What if I see my life going in one direction and God sees it going in another direction? What if God's will for my life isn't the happily ever after that I thought it was going to be? That it wasn't the happily ever after that Disney tells me that I'm supposed to experience? What if God's will for my life isn't the happily ever after of being married, of having children, of having the high-paying job, of being the CEO, the COO, the CFO, to have all the alphabets, to have the PhD, the MBA, the MD of the this and the that? What if God's will isn't the happily ever after we imagine for ourselves? Will we still have the courage to say, nevertheless? If it doesn't match up to what I thought in my mind, will I still say, nevertheless? See, we're quick to rush to this nevertheless, but have we really sat down and interrogated our own hearts? Wrestle with ourselves and God's will. And because when we say nevertheless, there's no turning back. I'm reminded of the movie The Matrix. How many of y'all familiar with The Matrix? The Matrix. So The Matrix came out in the late 90s, and there was a key moment in The Matrix that turns everything, because Morpheus, Lawrence Fishburne's character, encounters Neo, Keanu Reeves' character, and he gives him an option. He says, you could take the blue pill, or you could take the red pill. If you take the blue pill, you'll stay connected into the matrix, and guess what? Life will go on as you know it, and all the chaos and destruction. Guess what? You just stay plugged in and move on with life as you know it. But if you take this red pill, I'm gonna take you down the rabbit hole to your destiny. But if you take this red pill, there's no coming back from the rabbit hole. Because once you take this pill, there's no turning back, Neo, because if you take this red pill, you're going to walk into your destiny. You're going to walk into your purpose, but you have an option. You can take the blue pill or the red pill. And in a real sense, when we say the words nevertheless, you're taking the red pill. And you're going down this rabbit hole that God is taking you, saying, hey, this is what I have in store for your life. This is the purposes and things I plan for you. And guess what? They may not look like what we expect, but that's what happens when we say nevertheless. So this is the question that we must wrestle with in our own spirits and with our own selves. This is the question, and write this question down. Write this question down. The question is, how do we submit to God's will when it's something we do not desire? How do we submit to God's will when it is something we do not desire? Let me say it one more time. How do we submit to God's will when it is something we do not desire? I believe that there are lessons from the garden that Jesus teaches us about how to deal with this question. One lesson we learn from Jesus in the garden is that we must have a getaway. Say getaway. We must have a getaway. We need a place where we can escape from the noise and chaos of the world, so where we can actually hear from God. You need to have your own Garden of Gethsemane. You need to have your own Mount of Olives. Can I tell you about the Mount of Olives real quick? Can I tell you about it real quick? So about the Mount of Olives, in the Luke account of this text, it says that Jesus goes to the Mount of Olives, which was his custom. The Mount of Olives. The Mount of Olives is the most ancient and probably the most important cemetery in Jerusalem. It's a cemetery that's been used since ancient times all the way up until now. And this is the place where Jesus went to often. And I'm thinking to myself, of all places, Jesus, why go to the cemetery? Could you not go to the park? Could you go back to your mama house? Why the cemetery? And I could tell you this, because Jesus, Jesus was one going through these towns, healing people, and used to have all these crowds following him. So I'm pretty sure a crowd wouldn't follow him into the cemetery. I'm pretty sure he was like, I could get me some peace and quiet in the cemetery, because I know cousin Ray ain't gonna wake up right now, because it's peace and quiet. He's able to go there and unplug. You see, that place was like his man cave, his coffee shop. It was his office. It was his place where Jesus could go and unplug from the world. And what I'm not telling you this morning is to go to Oakland Cemetery. Don't go to Westview. Don't go to Southview. You don't even have to go to Lincoln. But what you must do is find that place that's your place where you can go and escape from the world, where you can escape from the busyness of life. We live in a very busy and hyper-connected society. This thing right here, Lord, I'm talking about between going to the office, between going to this meeting, going down to church for that meeting. I got to go to City Hall for this. I got to run this club's organization. I got to go to this club's meeting. I got to go to alumni meeting here. You're doing all that. Then once all that's done, I have to go pick up the kids. I can drop them off at this practice, at that practice, at this practice, at that practice. Then so that's just the business of your regular life. And then if you connect it to the social media world, oh my Lord, You got to check in Twitter. You got to check in on Facebook because you got to see how many people have liked your picture because that's important. You got to go to Instagram, go to Kick, go to Snapchat, and whatever. And trust me, there's going to be a new one before 2015 now. Well, we're so plugged into so many things that we're not plugged into God, and we don't know what God wants to do with us in our lives. And so there are going to always be things that try to come in and distract us from God, distract us from what God will have us do. So you need a place to get away and unplug. And the thing about that place is that place has to be sacred. That's a place that you have to protect with everything you got, because another thing too, and let me slide this in parenthetically, is that you can't invite everybody into your space. That's your space. Your space. Even in the text we see, he didn't bring all the disciples up. He said, Peter, James, and John, y'all come here. Another time when he went on a mount, he didn't take all the disciples again. He took those three, Peter, James, and John, because probably there's a more intimate relationship that he has with them that he doesn't have with the other 12, with the other disciples. The thing about being in that space, because in that space, some of our most vulnerable moments we have in that space. Those moments where we wrestle with God and spend time with God, that's a very vulnerable space. So everybody can't come in there because everybody can't handle your vulnerabilities. Let me say it to you like this. You all see Reverend Michael Wortham right now. Typically when you encounter me, you're going to encounter Reverend Michael Wortham. But there is a special place in my life that's reserved for Michael. That I don't have to go to God and be Reverend Michael Wortham. I could go to God and just be Michael, and I could deal with all of Michael mess. I could deal with me fussing with God, saying, God, I don't want to be a preacher no more. I get to go and do that with God right there, because that's me and God right there. That's my space, and everybody can't come there because I get to just be me. You need a space where you can really just get to be you. Jesus was going all over the place, and they were reaching on him, tugging on him, because he's the healer. He's the one that does all this. He's the one that's preaching in the synagogue. He's the one that's healing all the persons. And they're tugging on Jesus, and Jesus has to get away to just be Jesus. Not the Messiah, not the healer, not the teacher, just to be Jesus, Mary's boy, Joseph's son, just to be Jesus. So you need that space. That's important for you. That's for your livelihood. That's for your life's sake. We call that self-care. So you need your getaway so you can wrestle with God, and that leads us into our next thing, because the getaway helps us wrestle with God and wrestle with our call and wrestle with God's purpose for our life. The way I like to say it is that Jesus went to the cemetery to get his mind right. Again, I told y'all I found it interesting Jesus would go to a cemetery. And when I think about the cemetery is also a place of memory. We go there, we bury our loved ones, those that have gone on before us. I know anytime I get a chance to go back to Birmingham, I go and visit my grandmother's grave, and I visit my great-grandmother's grave. And I go there because when I go there, I'm able to just remember what grandmama taught me. I'm able to sit there and laugh with myself and think about all the good times I had with grandma when I'm feeling low, when I'm feeling discouraged. I know I can go there because I can pull something from my ancestors. Did Jesus go and do the same thing? Because it said in the Mount of Olives that the tombs of the prophets Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi were there. So did Jesus, when he might have had frustrating moments in ministry, when he got tired of healing people, when he got tired of teaching, when he got tired of preaching, he would go to the cemetery and probably sit at Haggai's tomb and say, you know what, I'm tired. But Haggai could tell him, guess what, I was tired too when I was in ministry, but I had to keep pressing. I had to keep delivering the word of the Lord. So did he go there to draw some strength from the ancestors? Or let me say it this way, did he go there to bury his will? They said he went there often, as custom. He went there enough times to say, did he go there to always say, God, you know what? I have my personal desires, but guess what? I'm gonna dig a grave and put them in it. My personal desires, things that I know are counter to what you're telling me to do, I'm going to put them right here so I can keep on doing this thing that you called me to do. Then he go and bury his will there. So church, let me ask you this. Are you willing to go to the cemetery? Dig up your own grave. Take your own will, your own desires, your own purposes for your life and say, you know what? I'm going to put them right here. Ashes to ashes, earth to earth, dust to dust. I'm going to bury my will right here. And God, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick up your will for my life. I'm going to pick up your purposes for my life. I'm going to pick up that thing that you're telling me to do, because the one thing I know about this is that God's will for our lives, God's purpose for our lives, it has a reach and a touch that our wills can't get to. God's will stretches a little bit further than our arms and our will can do for itself. So did Jesus go there to bury his own will? Because the thing is this, I know for each of us in here, we have our own desires. We have our own things we want to do. And we pray to God that it's the same thing, it's in line with God's will. But let me help you real quick. In Proverbs, it reminds us that in the hearts of humans, they plan their course, but the Lord establishes their steps. I also read in Proverbs 2 where it says, trust the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. Acknowledge God in all your ways and God will direct your path. Do we have the courage to bury our will today and trust God? Do we have the courage to trust God even when we can't trace God's hand? Do we have the courage to say the words of the great hymn, all to Jesus I surrender. All to him I freely give. I will ever love and trust him. In his presence freely live. I surrender all. I surrender all. Do we have the courage to bury our will and pick up God's will? Because let me tell you this, the final lesson that we learn from Jesus in Gethsemane is that if we bury our will, pick up God's will, the decision we make in that moment has implications across generations. That decision that we make right there affects so many people for generations unborn. The decision we make in the garden not only will impact me, but all persons I will ever come in contact with. Robert Kennedy said it like this: few will have the greatness to bend history itself, but each of us can work to change a small portion of events. And in the total of all those acts will be written this history of this generation. Dr. King said it in this way: we are all tied together in a single garment of destiny, caught in an inescapable network of mutuality. And whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. For some strange reason, I can never be what I ought to be until you are what you ought to be. And you can never be what you ought to be until I'm everything I ought to be. Every decision we make not only impacts us, but it impacts others as well. Jesus in this critical moment could have made a decision one way or the other. Jesus for himself could have decided to accept or not accept God's will. I know that's probably hard for some of us, that Jesus could have said no. Yes, Jesus could have said no. He asked God, could somebody else do it? So in my mind's eye, I can't help but wonder what the world would be like if Jesus decided to go against God's will. What would the world be like if Jesus decided not to drink from the cup? What would have happened if Jesus didn't say nevertheless? Would Jesus have just faded away into history? Whatever miracles and teachings and things he would have done, would it just went away with the wind? If Jesus didn't say nevertheless, will we have such great persons in human history as Martin Luther, Mother Teresa, Joan of Arc? If Jesus had decided to not say nevertheless, and go against God's will, will we have a Harriet Tubman, a Sojourner Truth, a Frederick Douglass, a Henry McNeil Turner, a Richard Allen, a Absalom Jones, a Joanna Lee, a Nanny Helen Burroughs, Martin Luther King Jr.? If Jesus had said, God, I'm not going to do it, where would we be right now? Will we even be in this sanctuary right now? Would I even be talking to you right now? Would we even have an Ebenezer Baptist Church? Will we even be on the corner of Auburn Avenue? Will we have a Wheat Street, a Big Bethel, a Liberty? What will we be right now if Jesus had said no? But thanks be to God. Thanks be to God that Jesus still had one more nevertheless left up in his spirit. Thanks be to God that Jesus was able to see the bigger picture. That thanks be to God that Jesus was able to set aside his wills and his wants and his desires for something greater. You see, Jesus' commitment to God's will and not his own will have us gathered in this sanctuary this morning. Jesus' commitment to God, it opened up the door for salvation. You see, Jesus' commitment to God reminds us that God's will for our lives has a reach. It has a reach that our own desires can't touch. So you see, nevertheless, we thank God for this nevertheless. And I ask you this morning, will you say nevertheless? Will you say nevertheless? This side, will you say nevertheless? Will you say nevertheless? I don't trust my sides. In the middle, will you say nevertheless? I don't know about the middle balcony. Will you say nevertheless? I don't know. Choir, will you say nevertheless? I think the choir got it. I'm going to come back over here. Will you say nevertheless? I don't know. I'm going to come back. Will you say nevertheless? Got to try it again, middle. Will you say nevertheless? I don't know. Balcony, you need to help me. Will you say nevertheless? I don't know. Choir, will you help me? Will you say nevertheless? Preachers, will you help me? Will you say nevertheless? Nevertheless. It's nevertheless. I was thinking about Dr. King a lot over the past few days. I'm thinking about Dr. King a lot. Actually, yesterday I looked at the documentary Citizen King. Watched that documentary yesterday. And Dr. King was a nevertheless man. He was a nevertheless man. Because Dr. King could have easily been a professor in somebody's academic institution with his PhD from Boston University. He could have easily just been somebody's pastor for a number of years and just been quiet and flew under the radar, pastor for about 50 years, and ride off in the sunset. But when he felt the hand of God on him, and he thought about his family, and he thought about his children, and he thought about everything, and in that moment, he said, you know those words, he said, I want to live a long life, but longevity has its place. You're able to say things like that when you say nevertheless in your spirit. The thing about nevertheless, it's not an easy prayer to pray. Because it may take you down a road that you never thought for your life. But what the world needs now is more Christians more people of God to say nevertheless. Because let me tell you this. It's the people who say nevertheless that actually make a dent in society. It's the people who say nevertheless that actually change things in the world. And the interesting thing is when you say your nevertheless, right now it may not seem like you're doing something and it's making that change right now. When Dr. King died, he wasn't everybody's best friend. Maybe even when he died, he thought, was all this work, did I do this in vain? How would this work play out 50 years down the road? And we still see how his legacy is still inspiring groups in a generation to say that we will march for justice. We will fight for justice. But it's because his willingness to say nevertheless. So the thing is, your nevertheless is important because guess what? It's going to impact somebody's grandkids and great-grands down the road. Your nevertheless right now. So you got some homework. Say homework. Because you know, a lot of times folk leave about the church and say, that was a great sermon. What did he preach about? I don't know, but it was good. So you finna have some homework. So this is your first bit of homework. Your first bit of homework is this. Find your getaway. What is your getaway? Where is your place that you go to where you can really hear from God and say, God, what is it that you will have me do in this life? And you need to find that this week. I almost want to do a report next Sunday. Like next Sunday, y'all need to check in with me and see and tell me what your space is. But find your getaway. Find that place for you. Spend time there with God so you can decipher what God will have you do. And the second thing is wake up and say nevertheless. If you're serious about being a follower of God, serious, because that's what we need. We need more folk to be serious about this thing. Folks getting killed in real life because Christians ain't stepping up. That's why I say, because we ain't doing our job. So we need more folk that's going to say nevertheless. So today, I almost wanted to say, Dad, send out a text message to everybody. Not my will. Be able to say nevertheless. And once you're committed to your nevertheless, guess what? You may not get a whole lot of money for it. Gonna tell you that now. Don't expect to be rich because you said nevertheless. That's not how the game go. Don't expect them. You might not be seen on newspapers or on TV. The folks, your name might not be on the marquee. But we're not worried about that because nevertheless, it's a bigger aim that we're going for when we say nevertheless. It's a bigger picture. But your commitment to saying nevertheless, I promise you this, I guarantee you this, it will impact generations to come. You want to know how I know? Look at Jesus. We're here right now, gathered together. We celebrate this name. We talk about how we want to live and walk in his name. It's because he said, nevertheless. So with your homework, find your getaway. And in your getaway, that's when you'll find your place where God will show you something. And when God shows it to you, have the courage to say nevertheless and watch God do something amazing with your life.